Hi, I'm Rudyard Griffiths, the moderator of the Munk debates. As we do before every debate, we have an opportunity to sit down with our presenters, get their thoughts on the topic at hand. And it's my pleasure now to have the opportunity to spend some time with Arthur Brooks, Harvard professor, former head of AEI, published author, musician, the list goes on and on. Arthur, great to have you here in Toronto. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you, Rudyard. It's wonderful to be here. Always wonderful to be in Toronto.
Okay, well, let's start with the beginning and how you first became attracted to these ideas of free enterprise, the power of free markets. When did the light kind of turn on for you?
The light kind of turned on for me pretty late. And the reason is that I didn't have a standard academic background. I didn't have a background that was involved with economics or finance or commerce or business in any way. I come from a family of artists and academics in Seattle, which is practically Canada. And we were a progressive family. I don't remember ever having a conversation about capitalism growing up. I'm sure we were derisive about it. And I didn't go to college, at least not traditionally. I wound up dropping out of college after 1 year to become a professional classical musician. And I did that all the way through my 20s. And in my 20s, I had kind of an epiphany. I'd always wondered about what had happened in the world since I was a kid. I had seen grinding poverty as a child, just like all of us did in the early 1970s, pictures in the National Geographic magazine. And then when I was touring as a musician, as a teenager, and in my early 20s, I was going to developing nations and seeing some of the worst poverty I could have imagined. Well, as time went by, it seemed like that conversation sort of stopped, like people had lost interest in it somehow. And so I looked into it on my own, just as a 28 or 29 or 30-year-old, as I was getting interested in ideas. And I found something that shocked me. I, like most Americans and most Canadians, was of the view that poverty had gotten worse, because it always seems to get worse. But it hadn't. I actually found data that showed that since 1970, that 4/5 of starvation level poverty had been eradicated. And it was not in the headlines. I thought, this is the biggest news. This is incredible. This is a humanitarian achievement on a scale that I couldn't ever have imagined. And I looked into why that was. I actually started studying economics by correspondence. I wound up studying and getting my bachelor's degree by distance learning, and still hungry for this answer, I went back and got my PhD and actually became an economist, because I thought, look, 2 billion of my brothers and sisters have been pulled out of poverty since I was a kid. How do you get the next 2 billion? And the answer led me straight on to democratic free enterprise. It was globalization, the much maligned and hated globalization. It was free trade and the spread of property rights and the rule of law and the culture of entrepreneurship. In point of fact, it's what draws people to Canada and the United States, what made this into a developed country that was spreading around the world. People were looking, as we were seeing their poverty, they were looking at us in Canada and the United States and emulating the system, and they were pulling themselves out of poverty. I thought, look, it's not perfect. I'm not insane. I don't think that's the only thing that you need. You need rules, you need morals, you need regulation, but my goodness, if I could spread this idea, who knows, maybe we can get the next 2 billion out of poverty.
Now, you've taken this a step forward recently with this Netflix documentary, The Pursuit.
Yeah.
What was the impetus behind that?
The impetus behind The Pursuit is I wrote a book called The Conservative Heart in 2015, which actually talked about how we have conservatives in Canada and the United States. They have certain principles that they always talk about free enterprise, about national security, et cetera. But they don't mean anything unless they actually start with proper morality of solidarity and brotherhood, about care for our neighbors. I talked about what dignifies these conservative ideas properly, what's most written on my own heart. Somebody bought the rights to the book, or acquired the rights to the book, and a filmmaker wound up following me around the world for 3 years. And the rest is I guess, it's not history, but at least it's a film on Netflix.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to hear some of your critics tonight, at least critics of these ideas, in your opponents. And one obvious argument that they're going to put forward is that while the capitalist model may have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, it's creating new and profound inequalities within both developing and developed societies. Maybe more importantly, in our own societies here in the West, we're now seeing this estrangement of the super rich from the rest, with increasingly profound political impacts. What's your reply to that supposed crisis of our time?
Well, I'm concerned about inequality just like anybody else, but I have to look at really what the facts say. If you just look at raw income differences, income inequality is growing. It's growing in Canada, it's growing especially in the United States, it's growing in Western Europe. But if you look at adjusted income inequality, which is to say with taxes and transfers, with the growth of the welfare state, it's been pretty flat for the past 30 years. If you look at consumption inequality, which is to say how much we consume, it's dead flat. And if you look at worldwide income inequality, it's been falling for 35 years. I mean, this is an example of how you could get one thing that you don't like, but you can't spread this across the entire concept. You certainly can't spread it across the entire globe. The thing that concerns me, however, is opportunity inequality, not income inequality. In point of fact, we have a big problem in our societies with people who don't sense their dignity. Dignity comes from a sense of worth, a sense of being worthy of respect. And that comes from being needed. And we have too many societies now, and we have too many parts of our societies here in Canada, but especially in the United States, where people have not worked for 2 and 3 generations. That concerns me a lot more. That's not a product neither of socialism nor capitalism. It's a problem that all of us, notwithstanding our ideologies and our ideas about politics and economics, that we need to solve.
Some would say that the state is the right mechanism to solve that through, some cases, maybe radical redistribution of wealth, to give the state big tools to reach into those communities to create opportunity.
We do have a lot of redistribution, and I have no beef with people who want more redistribution. I may not agree, but I certainly understand those arguments. But the truth of the matter is that the best way to give people the sense of dignity, the sense of being needed, is to allow people to work, to allow people to pull themselves up. And we just don't have very many good state mechanisms. I wish there were better ideas to give everybody a good job, but that's just not how government, that's not what government is designed to do. I mean, I have a lot of conservative friends who trash the public sector because they can't do that, but that's not what government was designed to do. I mean, give government its due. It's good at redistributing and providing basic services, but it's not good at giving people private sector employment. That's the reason that we need economic growth, such that we can create more jobs, particularly those for people at the margins of society.
Another argument that no doubt will be a feature of this debate is the impact of capitalism on climate and on the global ecosystem.
Right.
There's an increasingly vociferous critique of capitalism that's emerged, saying in a sense that it's poisoning the planet for profit. What's your assessment of that argument?
I don't think it's a strong argument. I understand that there have been all kinds of cases of market failure where we have pollution, we have spillover effects, we have climate change, and in many cases it comes from cheating systems. This has to do with the fact that government regulation is not strong enough, it's not strenuous enough. We don't have societies that are abiding by proper rules. But it's also the case, and it's worth pointing out, that statist economies and statist societies have much bigger environmental problems than freer societies. And so you find that the worst environmental depredations that we've ever seen are in places like the old USSR and China. I mean, the pictures of entire rivers clogged with dead pigs, the worst nuclear disaster in the history of the planet. I mean, an entire inland sea drained down to nothing. These happen in socialist economies. The United States has literally been getting cleaner, as has Canada, for the past 100 years. Now, this doesn't mean that capitalism is perfect, and we do need to do better, to be sure. I'm as concerned as anybody else. But the idea that capitalism is uniquely responsible for poisoning the planet, it's not an argument that holds water.
Where do you think society is at in terms of this debate? Because right now in your country, the United States, we're seeing what seems to be a renewed interest in, I don't know how we want to characterize it, socialism, democratic socialism, some form of greater state involvement in American life. We're seeing political candidates like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, putting forward quite bold proposals that probably would not have really had the credibility 5 years ago that they seem to have today with voters. Is this something new and enduring in the American debate?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I actually don't regret it either. I love a competition of ideas. And the truth of the matter is that you can't make progress when people are not competing on the level of ideas. And I love hearing Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's ideas. I mean, I can't put forth my own ideas if somebody's not talking about something else. The reason I like the Munk debate is because we get smart people, or at least the other ones are smart besides me, who get to talk about things that really matter. And in a free society where nobody's worried and nobody's suffering, that's a very beautiful thing. That's what I love about democracy. I also notice, that in truth, people are talking in a mainstream way about much stronger socialist ideas they have in the past, but the interest in socialism, particularly among young people, is the same as it was 25 years ago for people in those age groups. I mean, I was concerned about that, and so I went back and I ran the numbers myself, and I found that, about 60% of people under 30, they think socialism is better than capitalism. Well, I thought that too. So when I was in
buy a house, have some kids.
Yeah, 25 years old.
So
this is pretty normal, and this is pretty okay, and I'm not deeply worried about it at all.
Yeah. So what do you think the future of free enterprise and capitalism looks like in this era of rapid technological change? Because some people have very dyspeptic views about how automation, AI, and other things could really threaten the capitalist model. The dignity of work, which you've mentioned is such a core value. How do you see the future?
The truth is, of course, that I don't know. If I did, I'd have a hedge fund, I'd be a billionaire, and I'm not. It's the way that the economy works is quite mysterious to everybody. I mean, there are surprises. The surprises per se are kind of what makes it interesting. But I suspect that there will be the kinds of challenges that you allude to that are going to be the challenges of our time. I mean, I don't think that automation is going to make 25% of jobs obsolete, which people often say. And the reason for that is because any industrial revolution or any change in the economy, any change in technology, what it does is just rearranges people's jobs. Everybody has between 20 and 40 tasks in their discrete job. You and I both do. When you take these things apart and then put them into new jobs, that looks like a big dislocation in the economy. What it is a reorganization in the economy. So I'm not worried that jobs aren't going to exist. What I'm worried is that people are going to be slow in being able to do these new jobs because we're horrible at retraining people. For my money, the problem is not capitalism or socialism in the way that we're leaving people behind, but our lack of imagination in training people in human capital development. We have education systems in our countries that are appropriate to 1968. And it's, last I checked, 2019, and the needs of the economy are very different than they were in the past. And
so why is that? Why isn't the market providing a powerful signal, a powerful cue that's then being responded to? It seems like there's a market failure.
Yeah, there is a market failure. It's actually a government failure. I love the fact that one of the greatest things that the government has ever done is universal public education. It's a wonderful thing, but it's a lumbering tool. It's a beast that moves slowly, and it doesn't react very well to market signals. A private sector entity would do better under the circumstances, but public sector education provision, for all of its blessings, has not been able to keep up and isn't keeping up today.